Coming up, the Nets trade for Kobe Bufkin. That's right, another young point guard heading to Brooklyn as the team continues its roster overhaul. Could he be a long-term piece? I'll answer that after this.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I'm Erik Slater, Brooklyn Nets beat reporter for ClutchPoints.com. Thank you for making me your first listen of the day. The show is 100% free on all those great platforms. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Download the FanDuel app today. And on today's show, we've got another Nets trade, continuing what has been a wild offseason. Brooklyn acquires Kobe Bufkin from the Atlanta Hawks today for cash considerations. And my initial reaction to the trade is this is Sean Marks addressing a really pressing need on the Nets roster for another young point guard. We all know that's really what Brooklyn needed, was another young point guard after drafting 3 in the first round this year. Just kidding. Obviously, that is not a pressing need for the Nets team. But my actual reaction to this deal is I think it's an interesting flyer for the Nets, and it follows, a pattern, a way that they should be conducting their business, entering or being into this rebuild. Same kind of strategy they took throughout their first rebuild with Sean Marks, and that's taking flyers on, players who had past pedigree, players who, were high upside guys or perceivably that in their past. And that's what they get with Kobe Bufkin. This is a guy who was the number 15 pick in the 2023 draft out of Michigan. I remember liking him going into that draft. I mean, if you watch his tape at Michigan, he showed some really high-level driving ability during his sophomore season as a guy with the ball in his hands, a lead ball handler. He, really showed that he could get downhill with a quick first step, had a variety of, pretty crafty off-the-dribble moves. He shot 70% at the rim or over 70% at the rim, and he improved as a three-point shooter, during that campaign. He shot in the mid-30s. He flashed some, defensive capabilities. He does have really good size at point guard at 6'5", with a 6'8" wingspan. And because of that, I mean, I remember I looked back after this trade broke at some of the things I had written leading up to that draft. And there were a lot of people who had Buffkin, mocked in the late lottery as high as number like 9 or 10. He was really in that 10 to 15 range. Then he ended up falling to 15 during the draft. But if you're trying to get an evaluation of him as a player and what he could be for this Nets team, it's pretty difficult because he just hasn't played much basketball since joining the league. He had a thumb injury during his rookie season and obviously just wasn't really ready to play NBA minutes. He only played in 17 NBA games that year and then had 14 G League appearances. And then this past season, he played in 10 games at the beginning of the year before having season-ending shoulder surgery in December. So he was an intriguing prospect coming out of the draft, and there were a lot of people who liked him and thought that he would be a rotation piece for the Hawks, and it just didn't work out that way. Some, because of injuries, and then obviously he just didn't develop the way that the Hawks hoped he would in terms of when he did play, the scoring efficiency really wasn't there. He is a guy who, while he has good size from a height perspective, needs to add some weight to his frame, and he did struggle, finishing at the rim in his limited opportunities. He struggled as a three-point shooter, and obviously Atlanta wasn't too high on his capabilities because they just traded him for literally nothing but financial flexibility. Buffkin has a $6.9 million team option in 2026-27 that the Hawks were going to decline. And by doing this and trading him for cash considerations, they're creating a lot more room below the luxury tax. And that's important because they're going to have to extend guys like Dyson Daniels and Kristaps Porzingis. And if you look at their guard rotation this season, they obviously already have Trae Young. They have Dyson Daniels. They got Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Luke Kennard this offseason. So they're really didn't seem like there was going to be a place for Buffkin. And obviously Atlanta decided that he wasn't going to be a player that was going to make an impact or that they felt had a ceiling, long-term for them where he was going to be a rotation caliber piece. And, the Nets take advantage somewhat of their position, as a team, the only team left in the NBA with cap space because Buffkin's making a little bit over $4 million this season. And you think, there are still teams who could acquire him. They could trade other players for him. They could bring him into exceptions. And you would think if there were other teams who were high on him as a player, that somebody would have maybe been able to give up a second-round pick or something along those lines for him. So it doesn't really seem like he had a market whatsoever. And the Nets are able to get him for free. So I think from that perspective, it's a good trade for the Nets. You're not giving up anything. You're taking a player who has some past pedigree. I like, in college what Buffkin showed offensively, and he just hasn't been able to carry it over to the NBA since then. But getting him for free, we'll see what he can do. And he should be a player who should get some opportunities for the Nets this season, similar to what you saw the Nets do like with a guy like Zaire Williams last year. A guy who was a former lottery pick. He was cast off, didn't catch on during his time with Memphis, although he played more than Buffkin did and was there longer. But the Nets get him as a salary dump. They get a second-round pick alongside him. And he had a good year last year, and then he gets a contract extension with the Nets, and they'll have an extended runway to see what he can be. We'll see if, Buffkin can show similar flashes, if he can be a guy who warrants another opportunity. But even if not, the Nets are no worse off for wear, and we'll see what he can do, in a guard rotation that is just absolutely stacked right now. And, we got to talk about that guard rotation, how this affects it, what guys could potentially be getting minutes, what guys might be spending some time in Long Island. So I'll touch on all that when I continue Locked On Nets after a quick break. But before that, want to tell you about our friends over at 5 Hour Energy. Caffeine just got a flavor upgrade. 5 Hour Energy shots deliver tasty caffeine in 17 bold flavors. Each 2-ounce shot packs the caffeine of a premium 12-ounce cup of coffee, plus B vitamins and nutrients with 0 sugar and 0 crashes. Guys, what I love most about these is how portable they are. Big taste, tiny shot. You can take it anywhere and get the boost that you need when you need it. The flavors are delicious. They go down smooth. They remind you of having just an easy drink in the morning that gives you that energy you need to carry through the day. The favorite flavor, the blueberry 5 Hour Energy shot, just delicious. It's refreshing and gives you that quick lift before a busy day. Guys, enough with boring, flavorless caffeine. It's time to give your caffeine a flavor upgrade with 5 Hour Energy shots. Get you the favorites you love, or be bold and try something new in-store and online at www.5hourenergy.com or Amazon today. Coming back from the break on today's Locked On Nets episode, reacting to Brooklyn's acquisition of Kobe Bufkin from the Atlanta Hawks. That's another young point guard coming to this Nets roster. Buffkin, a little, almost 22 years old, so still in that younger range, part of that 2023 draft class. And this move, obviously, I made a joke at the beginning of this podcast because this trade is off the heels of the Nets just making headlines, and some people almost making fun of them for taking 3 international point guards in the first round of this year's draft in Yegor Dioman, Nolan Traore, and Ben Saraf. Now they add Buffkin to the mix. They also obviously have Cam Thomas, at least for now, after he signed his 1-year, $6 million qualifying offer. So it's a very crowded guard rotation. It's a crowded Nets roster overall, which I'm going to get to in a little bit. But just focusing on the guard rotation, I do think that this will impact, the way that the Nets point guard rotation, especially for these rookies, plays out throughout the year somewhat, because I do think that they're going to want to get a look at Buffkin. I mean, this is a guy who, as I said, has a $6.9 million team option next season. Whether the Nets pick that up, whether they decline him, they obviously saw something in him where they thought that it made sense to bring him in, even though they gave up nothing for him but cash considerations. If they didn't think that he had any potential, they wouldn't have traded for him. So they bring him into the mix. You have a little bit, obviously, of a clock on your decision for him, and you need to make that decision sooner than some of these rookie point guards. Those guys are developmental guys. You're going to have them down the line. And while Buffkin is that too, he has that team option next season. So this is similar to the Zaire Williams situation, I think, where they bring him in. And, I think Buffkin maybe doesn't have that expansive of a role next season, but I think he will have a role, and he's a guy that they're going to want to get minutes. So, it's going to affect these other guys. And I've said, Yegor Dioman, I think, is going to be the Nets starting point guard. I don't think there's really any question about that. I think Nolan Traore will have a rotation role from day one as a guy who comes in off the bench as the Nets point guard in the second unit, and also can play in the first unit when Dioman, slides down to the 2 or down to the wing. I've said that I think that Ben Saraf is the guy of those 3 point guards, and then also Danny Wolf, not a point guard, but another guy at the end of that Nets draft class that I think will spend some time in the G League to begin the year. So that's kind of how I see this playing out. I think the Nets have used Long Island as a tool to develop players in the past. You look at guys like, obviously, Noah Clowney spent some time down there, Nick Claxton, any of the Nets draft picks for the most part have spent some time in Long Island. Tariq Whitehead's been there. So I would expect that guys like Saraf and Wolf, Saraf particularly because we're talking about the point guard rotation down there, at the beginning of the year, I think we'll spend some time in Long Island. I think that he'll get minutes in the NBA as well. But adding Buffkin to the mix now, this is just another guy that, you're going to want to at least see what he has, and you're going to want to, feature him at least to understand whether or not you're going to want to pick up that team option or whether he has potential to earn another deal down the line. So it's just a really crowded, Nets backcourt rotation at this point. And, it's also just a really crowded Nets roster, in general. You look at this now, the Nets made another move today, signing David Muoka. Most of you probably don't know who that is, but he played for the Nets G League team in 2023-24, young center. But point is they signed him, and if you include the unofficial signings of Fambo Zhang and Ricky Council, and now this Kobe Bufkin trade, the Nets have 24 players under contract, and that's well over what you're allowed to carry. You're only allowed to have 21 players under contract during the offseason and at training camp. The reason that they have it right now is because the Buffkin trade has not been made official yet. The Fambo Zhang signing and the Ricky Council signing, none of those have been made official yet. But the Nets are going to have to get off 3 more players ahead of the start of the regular season, and they obviously have several guys on partially or non-guaranteed contracts. When you look at Keon Johnson, you look at Jalen Wilson, Tyrese Martin, Drew Timme as well. So there's going to be more roster moves, and there's also going to be some financial things that the Nets need to get in order. And what could that look like? How could they potentially approach that ahead of training camp? I'll touch on that when I close out Locked On Nets after a quick break. But before that, want to tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Guys, FanDuel fits however you like to bet, player props, building a same-game parlay, or even jumping in live as the action unfolds. It makes every game more exciting, whether you're watching your team or just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup. It's quick, easy, and the best way to add a little more energy to Sundays. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. Coming back from the break, closing out today's Locked On Nets episode, reacting to Brooklyn's trade for Kobe Bufkin with the Atlanta Hawks. And I touched on before why the Nets are facing a roster crunch. Obviously, they have 24 players under contract right now. You're only allowed to have 21, so they're going to have to make some moves there. And then also financially, the Nets still have more work to do. I recorded a prior episode about how the Nets were, with Cam Thomas taking the qualifying offer at $6 million. The Nets were still well under the salary floor. And I said that there were going to be more moves coming to get them closer and, to that salary floor ahead of the start of the regular season. And this was one of those moves. They acquire Kobe Bufkin, where the Nets are at financially after this. Bufkin is under contract for $4.5 million this season. Before this, assuming the Nets were right under the salary floor, about $650,000 below it before this move, but they were going to have to waive several players to get down to 15 standard contracts, which is what NBA teams are allowed to carry during the regular season. So I said last on that pod that I previously recorded, if the Nets waived their 3 lowest paid players to get to 15 standard contracts, they were going to be about $7 million below the salary floor. Now, with them bringing in Buffkin and him taking that 15th roster spot, if the Nets waive all of their partially or non-guaranteed players, and that is guys like Keon Johnson, Jalen Wilson, Tyrese Martin, Drew Timme, if they waive all of those guys, they're still going to be like a little under $5 million below the salary floor. So there's got to be more moves coming. There has to be something else to do. And also with that, we've been talking about the competition for these back-end roster spots, with the Nets, with all of these guys who were contributors last season, as I just said, in Keon Johnson, Jalen Wilson, Tyrese Martin, Drew Timme, and guys that I think a lot of the fan base likes. But I've said, with all these moves, the competition for those roster spots is just getting more intense, and those spots are just becoming, really few and far between. And you look at this now, Kobe Bufkin is now that 15th guy, and you look at these partially or non-guaranteed guys that I was talking about, they don't even have a roster spot at the moment. Like those guys, as of now, unless the Nets do something and make a consolidation trade with their guaranteed players, the Nets have 15 players on guaranteed contracts right now who it doesn't look like they're going to waive anyone. So unless there's a consolidation trade or something along those lines, these partially or non-guaranteed guys are going to be odd men out. And some of those guys still can sign two-way contracts. Like you look at Jalen Wilson could sign a two-way contract. Drew Timme could sign a two-way contract. I think even Tyrese Martin could sign a two-way contract also. But a lot of the times when you're in those guys' position, that's obviously a demotion. And would they take it to stay with the team? Probably. But if you're getting cut, it's kind of a signal, obviously, that the team doesn't prioritize you. So a lot of those guys would probably look to, get to a situation where they would be more prioritized if that was available to them. So we'll see. But there are going to be more moves coming for the Nets after this because they have to reach the floor. And just talk about a busy offseason for the Nets. I mean, man, they made 5 first-round picks, which is obviously an NBA record. And then you look at the trades, they'd make the Terrence Mann trade with the Atlanta Hawks, get another first-round pick there. They make the Michael Porter Jr. trade, give up their best player from last season, pick up a future unprotected first-round pick. The Haywood Highsmith trade, they make that. Now a 4th trade, getting Kobe Bufkin, salary dumps galore for the Nets this offseason, as we all expected. But it's pretty crazy because that's 4 offseason trades, and there's going to be more to come because the Nets have more work to do to reach this salary floor. They have more work to do to cut down the roster ahead of training camp because they cannot carry 24 guys into training camp. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, especially for some of these guys who I know the Nets like, and these partially and non-guaranteed guys at the back end of the roster. And we'll see how it all goes, but I'll have coverage of all that here on Locked On Nets leading up to training camp. We're less than 2 weeks away. Media Day is going to be September 23rd. The Nets just announced that today, and then they're going to be opening training camp at HSS Training Center in Brooklyn on September 25th. So I'll have coverage of all that, but that does it for today's trade reaction pod here on Locked On Nets. If you guys do not already, subscribe to the show on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts, whether Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you enjoy the content, take a second, smash that like button, leave a comment. Let me know what you thought of the trade. Anything that you guys can do to engage is much appreciated as I try to grow this channel. But got a lot more coming up. I'll have all that and more when I'm back tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.